The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 43. To be a fool. Sactam sempra. Severus didn't know how much more he could tolerate. He dragged the boy who stumbled behind him as he mumbled nonsense with trembling lips. "Shut up!" Severus hissed. A raspy sob was muffled by another whimper, and Draco snapped. Killed them, killed... Severus spun around and gripped the boy's shoulders with both hands. "Keep silent. Nothing happened, you understand? Nothing. Move on." The whining protests didn't cease. All too quickly, the mere itching in Severus's lungs escalated to pain, and he rushed through the corridors with heavy steps pulling Draco along. The dungeons were empty and silent after midnight, and he released the boy from his grip with disgust. "You shamed your father. Next time, do as you're told." I couldn't, You could. You didn't want to. You showed weakness. "How could you?" Draco screamed. He closed his eyes. "I don't want to. I don't." Tears ran down his cheeks, and Severus had to steel himself against flinching away. "You don't want to," he whispered in Draco's ear. "No one asked you if you want to, Draco." Another choked sob, and Severus had to grab the boy's shoulders again to keep him up. "What did you tell him when he asked to see you?" he asked after his own panting subsided. "Nothing. We cannot afford mistakes, Draco. If you tell me your plan..." "No, he doesn't want anyone to know." Draco averted his gaze. He was lying then. "Tell me your plan and I'll help you. Tell me and I'll make it happen. Do you want him to see you break? Do you want him to kill your father?" "No!" "Then tell me. You need to have a better in this. You can't play it out without a backup plan in your mind. Think! What if you fail?" What if you fail, Draco? Do you want to see your mother dead? You'll show no mercy, I am sure." Draco's features twitched before he broke into another whimper. Snot and tears covered his face. "There is that room," he croaked. "That room, it appears when... pops up and is... helpful. There's a cabinet. It's broken, but I can fix it. If I can fix it, have you seen that cabinet at Borgin and Burke's?" Severus nodded stupidly as his mind worked over the information. "It has a twin." "Yes, it's a good plan. My plan. I don't want you in it. You must let me do it myself." Severus nodded, but didn't release him. "When?" "That's not your concern." That was enough for now. "Go wash yourself before anyone sees you. Quick." He stepped back, and Draco fled to the slithering common room. Severus was aware of his heart almost exploding as he arrived at his chambers and let his cloak fall down. He closed his eyes, and the world started spinning. He opened them again, and he thought that the world wasn't the place he'd like to see anyway. There were few things worth living for, fewest worth dying for, and nothing worth killing for. The dread for his deeds sank into his bones and made his head throb. His heart burned, and his forearm twitched. Severus imagined the headlines, "Death Eaters Eradicate Muggle Village," and exhausted dropped on his knees on the soft carpet. He could barely focus his vision. When he did so, he saw a head hovering at the far end of the room. He gave a nonchalant grunt and willed the image away by shutting his eyes once more. When he opened them again, he saw a blur. Potter's flying head approached him in silence. The boy kneeled too and took off the invisibility cloak. His mouth fell open. It occurred to Severus that he should say something. A dim part of his mind screamed that Potter had no business being here. A much more painful part wallowed in embarrassment for the state that Potter was seeing him in. "Is that blood?" Potter whispered. Once, Tom Riddle decided to have it all, and the world had never been the same since. How long would it take for this to end? How long would it take for the hearts of men to heal from all this hatred? People read of killings in the papers. Accompanied by the first coffee of their day and their warm homemade breakfast, they'd read it all and act concerned and scandalized for a moment or two. Then once the first shock wave was over, they would secretly rejoice, take pleasure from the importance of the events around them, borrow some of the thrill with each paragraph of terrors they would swallow with their eggs and bacon. They were fed on flesh and blood casually, daily, since always, forever. Boys like Draco were brought up in it. The tales of death were in their homes, their playgrounds, their common rooms. All this destruction and horror were not just in the newspapers that they read, no. They were a part of the common frenzy, part of life. But what was life, anyway? Nothing. Life was the least sacred thing, and his boys, his own students, were too willing to give theirs away to Voldemort and his cruelty. "Get that off," snapped Potter, and Severus was startled. "What are you doing here?" he croaked. "Leave." The bitterness he'd prefer was absent from his voice. If he was to argue with Potter, he needed strength. He didn't have it. "Leave." He was aware of fingers quickly unbuttoning his coat, and he half raised his arm so Potter could take it off. Severus was a coward. He'd always been, and the more he tried to be anything but, the more he knew he never would. He had to recognize cruelty for what it was. A part of him. Part of his past, his present. He had to recognize himself for what he was. Scum! His shirt was ripped open too, and Potter stopped. Severus looked down at his own torso, and it occurred to him that Potter was expecting to see him wounded. The wild eyes peering at him communicated that the correct realization had just sunk in. "Welcome to reality. I'm a murderer." He didn't dare to talk. Potter stood up, too quickly perhaps, but Severus didn't protest. The boy stepped back, and then Severus was left alone. "You need to go to the hospital wing. There may be a certain amount of scarring, but if you take Dittany immediately, we might avoid even that. Come." Draco attached himself to Severus and limped his way to the door. "And you, Potter, you wait here for me." As he led Draco to the hospital wing, he considered his options of either killing the brat or locking him in a torture chamber until he confessed how he knew his spell. His mind trailed back to how Potter had spent the past few months boasting and bragging over how easily he was now succeeding in potions. Severus had been suspicious, but still did nothing to investigate it further. His irritation increased as Draco whined and panted more than necessary. "I want him expelled! He tried to slaughter me, the filthy mudblood lover! My father is going to—" "Your father is going to be lucky if he gets out of prison in one piece," Severus said as he shoved Draco into the infirmary and informed Poppy of what had happened. She nodded and soothed Draco, who insisted that a most likely non-existent pain was tearing him apart. Severus made an effort not to roll his eyes and left to face the second part of this nightmare. Hurrying back to the bathroom, he swallowed back a venomous wave of self-disgust and ignored the still audible cries of Draco that sickened him even more than the real ones of the night before. Not for the first time, Severus thought of the impossibly great pleasure he'd take in leaving this place forever. Change his name, disappear, perhaps even start a life of his own. Although he wouldn't know what to do with it. Destroy it, that's what he'd do. He didn't have to go away for that. Approximately, there had been maybe 2 or 3 situations in his life he had failed to handle. Regret, he recalled, was something he was not willing to endure again, not for the sake of watching Draco slip away from him to a life that once stole away the best of Severus, and not for the sake of all the things he could have done to stop it, but he never did. Thoughts in vain. Stupid thoughts. Deciding against self-redemption, he allowed the bitterness to burn his mouth and decided that maybe starting a life far away from here maybe wasn't such a bad idea after all, indeed. On second thought, go. The Mourning Myrtle jumped into a stall, and with a splashing sound, she was gone. "I didn't mean it to happen," said Potter at once when they were left alone. "I didn't know what that spell did." A chill ran through Severus, and he was momentarily aghast. Well, a Potter who doesn't attempt murder at least once before graduation is not a Potter. "Apparently I underestimated you," he said quietly. "Who would have thought you knew such dark magic? Who taught you that spell?" He didn't expect the truth. Nevertheless, either Black had spilled it out at some point, or Potter had stolen from him again. "I read about it somewhere." "Where?" "It was a library book. I can't remember what it was called." "Liar!" Severus hissed. He had no time for this. Pushing into Potter's mind forcefully, he searched for the truth. The green eyes sparkled under the inspection. Moments before success, however, Potter locked him out, and the room was solid around them again. "Where, Potter?" Potter darted his eyes from Severus to the bloodied floor and back. Against all reason, Severus was loath to believe this was really happening. Narcissa would be furious. Dumbledore would have a nasty comment at the tip of his tongue too. May he bite it and may he choke. "It was written in a potion book I saw around a couple of years ago or so," Potter said too quickly. "I tried to find it again a few months ago, but I couldn't. I suppose someone took it." "Someone," he said lowly. "Not you." "No, sir." Courtesy in the most bizarre of situations. "Bravo!" The urge to feel remorseful had most assuredly not attacked Potter yet. The splitting headache that Severus had developed over the last hour was only a mere irritation compared to what Potter was usually doing to him. "Should you know who has that book, you are to inform me instantly." "Yes, sir, I don't know who has it, sir." "We can only hope you'll find out then. And when you do, I expect you to bring it to me." "In other words, I give you a few days to confess." Potter fled, and Severus was left in a puddle of water and blood. "Ah, but it's pure," a voice mocked inside his head. Cleaning up the mess, he thought of that foolish belief that life would eventually get better. Better how? Things were different now. He saw himself in Potter's eyes, and he couldn't understand it. He saw himself in Draco's eyes, and felt disgust. Whatever life hinged on the moment, everything could change in the blink of an eye. Potter's fantasies of love and Draco's fantasies of freedom would all eventually be crushed. Severus knew the truth as well as everybody. No one was in control of anything, ever. When Severus himself was a teenager, he thought that his story was again and again. Once upon a time, there was a boy who was willing to risk everything to keep the one he loved. But really, the story was, once upon a time, there was a boy, and his fear ate him alive. Myrtle was back again, and she fluttered her eyes at him. "Are you not going to use the loo?" she said glumly. "I wanted to watch you." "You call that flirting?" He spat absently. He waved his wand towards the tiles once more, removing all evidence of the fight. "Oh, I'm not flirting with you, I know," she said. "Know what?" Another wave of his wand, and the faucet was prepared. "Sometime after I died, there were 2 boys that locked the bathroom door and told me to leave. I know what they did," she said sullenly, and then grinned. "I watched them." Severus raised an eyebrow. "Did you do the same with Harry?" "Myrtle," he said carefully, "would you like me to bring you some incense?" At the loud gasp of terror, Severus smirked.